You are freezing to death. The temperature is plunging toward a negative 40-degree blizzard, and you have nowhere to hide. To survive tonight, you won't just need a fire. You will have to surrender your free will to the people who control that fire. If you've ever wondered why you stay quiet in toxic meetings, or why the fear of being canceled feels like actual physical pain, the answer is buried right here in the Ice Age. Watch until the end, because the ancient psychological trap that domesticated our ancestors is the exact same trap controlling your entire life right now. To truly understand the pure terror of the Paleolithic winter 30,000 years ago, you must permanently erase every cartoonish, romanticized image of the caveman you have ever seen. There were no comfortable caves on the open Mammoth steppe. The landscape was a flat, unforgiving, and endless void of ice and howling winds that stretched for thousands of miles. The cold in this era wasn't just a weather condition. It was an active, apex predator. It relentlessly hunted you. It ate your daily calories, thickened your blood, and slowly turned your extremities black with frostbite. In a negative 40-degree blizzard, every single breath you take feels like swallowing shattered glass. Your body immediately enters a state of absolute panic, violently shivering to generate friction and heat, burning through your precious fat reserves at an entirely unsustainable rate. But here is the most terrifying reality of early human survival. The most dangerous thing in this frozen, desolate wasteland wasn't the plunging temperature. It wasn't the massive saber-toothed cats or the packs of dire wolves stalking the invisible perimeter of your camp in the dark. The most dangerous thing was the group of people you were huddled next to. To survive this incredibly hostile environment, early humans absolutely couldn't rely on individual strength or solitary resourcefulness. They had to rely on the collective. And the exact moment your physical survival depends entirely on the collective, you are no longer a free individual. You are a hostage. The stakes were absolute and binary. Stay in the good graces of the tribe, or be cast out into the white abyss. There was no such thing as solitary survival in the Ice Age. Banishment was an immediate, guaranteed, and agonizing death sentence. And the leaders of these ancient groups knew exactly how to weaponize that primal fear to maintain absolute control over the pack. Before we uncover exactly how they built these frozen psychological prisons, hit that like button if you would rather face a hungry saber-toothed cat than a negative 40-degree blizzard in the dead of night. Before we dissect the dark psychological traps our ancestors fell into, we have to look at the sheer, undeniable genius of their physical survival. Archaeologists have discovered that ancient humans didn't just passively endure the extreme cold, they aggressively engineered their way through it. Look at the astonishing archaeological sites of Kostenki in Russia or Dolny Viestonets in the Czech Republic. These early humans essentially invented underground thermal engineering. They used tools made of antler and bone to dig deep, semi-subterranean pits straight into the rock-hard permafrost. By digging down, they utilized the Earth's natural geothermal insulation to completely block the biting, relentless surface winds. But their true architectural masterpiece, the structure that allowed them to conquer the Ice Age and expand across the globe, was the Mammoth bone house. Imagine the sheer physical willpower and coordinated effort required to construct just one of these shelters. They systematically hunted down massive woolly mammoths, beasts weighing up to 6 tons with tusks that could impale a man effortlessly. They meticulously harvested the massive ribs, the heavy skulls, and the thick mandibles, interlocking them like a gruesome jigsaw puzzle to create a massive, load-bearing structural dome. They then draped dozens of heavy, uncured animal hides over this macabre framework, sealing the edges tight with packed mud, clay, and frozen snow to create a nearly airtight environment. Inside this dark cage of bones, they built central hearths. The fire was the literal beating heart of the structure. They burned mammoth bones when wood was scarce on the frozen tundra. Fresh mammoth bone is incredibly dense and porous, filled with marrow and fat. Once ignited, it served as a fuel source that burned incredibly slow, producing a massive, radiant, and sustained heat. But this is exactly where the romanticized tale of ancient survival ends, and the brutal, unforgiving reality of human nature begins. Imagine being trapped inside one of these mammoth bone houses during a relentless 6-month winter. It is completely dark, illuminated only by the flickering, erratic orange glow of the central hearth. The air is unbelievably thick, suffocatingly heavy with the acrid smell of burning animal fat, dense wood smoke, rotting marrow, and unwashed human bodies. 20 to 30 people are packed into a circular dome barely 15 feet across. You are practically sitting on top of each other, constantly bumping shoulders and knees. There is zero privacy, there is nowhere to hide, the heat inside this dome does not distribute evenly. Right next to the roaring fire, it might be a comfortable, life-saving 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But at the extreme outer edges of the dome, right where the animal hides meet the frozen earth, thick ice crystals form on the walls. The temperature there barely hovers above freezing. This specific spatial reality created an invisible, ruthless, and terrifying social architecture. We will call this the thermal hierarchy. The elders, the strongest alpha hunters, and the tribal leaders claimed the absolute inner circle. They slept comfortably in the radiant, life-saving warmth of the hearth, their bodies relaxed and secure. The weaker members, the injured, the less popular, the outcasts, and the expendable were physically pushed to the freezing, miserable perimeter. Every single inch you moved away from that fire was a direct physical manifestation of your social standing within the tribe. The fire wasn't just heat, it was currency, it was power. If you wanted to stay warm, if you wanted to survive the night without your toes turning black and falling off, you had to constantly please the inner circle. You had to voluntarily share your best, most calorie-dense cuts of meat. You had to laugh enthusiastically at the leader's jokes, no matter how terrible they were. You had to violently suppress any dissenting opinions or rebellious thoughts. Because the moment you became a nuisance, the moment you challenged the unquestionable authority of the hearthkeepers, you wouldn't be beaten, you would simply be nudged outward. Just a few inches at a time, night after night, until you were sleeping against the ice. This wasn't just a physical arrangement, it was the ultimate system of psychological conditioning, setting the stage for thousands of years of human manipulation. The psychological pressure inside these mammoth bone houses was immense and unrelenting. You are completely trapped with the exact same 20 people for months on end, while a deadly blizzard rages just inches away outside the animal skins. The sheer claustrophobia alone would completely break the mind of a modern human. But the ancient human brain adapted to survive. It developed a hypersensitivity to subtle social cues, creating a desperate, hardwired, and biological need to belong to the group. Modern social neuroscience provides a truly chilling explanation for exactly how deep this conditioning goes. Consider the groundbreaking research by neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger. She placed human subjects inside fMRI machines to scan their brain activity while they experienced social exclusion. The setup was incredibly simple. The subject played a virtual game called Cyberball, throwing a digital ball back and forth with two other people on a screen. Suddenly, the other two avatars stop throwing the ball to the subject. They are excluded from a meaningless, trivial computer game. Yet, when researchers looked at the brain scans, a specific region called the anterior cingulate cortex lit up like a Christmas tree. Do you know what else specifically activates the anterior cingulate cortex? Severe physical pain, breaking a bone, burning your hand on a hot stove, getting stabbed. To your highly evolved brain, the emotional pain of being ostracized and ignored is completely indistinguishable from a severe, life-threatening physical injury. Why? Because 30,000 years ago in Kostenki, being excluded from the group wasn't just a sad emotional event that made you feel bad about yourself. It meant you were actively being pushed away from the fire. It meant your calories were being restricted. It meant you were going to freeze to death. The human brain rapidly evolved to treat social rejection as an immediate mortal threat, because in the harsh reality of the Ice Age, it literally was. The leaders of these Paleolithic tribes instinctively understood this powerful biological vulnerability. They didn't need to expend precious energy using physical violence to control the group. They used the ultimate, invisible psychological weapon, the looming threat of the cold. When a member of the tribe stepped out of line, they weren't necessarily physically assaulted. They were simply ignored. They were completely ostracized. The tribe would stop making eye contact. They would stop sharing food. Most importantly, the offender would be denied a physical space near the hearth. Psychologists classify ostracism into distinct stages. The initial reflexive stage, where you feel sudden pain, followed by the reflective stage, where you desperately try to figure out how to regain favor, and finally, the resignation stage, characterized by deep depression and helplessness. When you reached the resignation stage in the Ice Age, you simply laid down in the snow and died. This is the dark, foundational origin of human manipulation and social engineering. Absolute compliance was purchased not with gold, money, or physical chains, but with the basic, undeniable biological necessity of warmth. This environment created a brutal, inescapable dynamic of in-groups and out-groups. The in-group huddled comfortably around the fire, constantly reinforcing their shared beliefs, creating self-serving myths, and actively demonizing the out-group to logically justify their own privileged warm position. They created rituals and strict social codes that guaranteed their position near the hearth. If an outsider from a wandering, starving tribe miraculously approached their mammoth bone house in the dead of winter begging for shelter, they would likely be turned away to die alone in the snow. Resources were simply too scarce. Compassion was a dangerous luxury that the Ice Age simply did not permit. And within the tribe itself, this intense power dynamic forced every single individual to wear heavy psychological masks. You absolutely couldn't afford to be your true authentic self if your authentic self was even slightly annoying to the leader. You learned to constantly, obsessively read the room. You engaged in what psychologists call mimicry, unconsciously copying the behaviors, the specific speech patterns, the posture and the beliefs of the dominant members to signal submission and belonging. You mirrored their anger. You echoed their fears. You became a social chameleon, not out of malice or deceit, but out of a desperate, shivering biological necessity to stay near the heat. If this sounds uncomfortably familiar to how you navigate your modern social life, you are beginning to understand the trap. The leaders of the Ice Age didn't just build houses out of mammoth bones. They built a neurological architecture of fear and compliance that is still entirely active inside your brain right now. The threat of the cold is the most effective psychological leash ever designed. Tell me in the comments, if you were trapped in that mammoth bone house for 6 months, would you fight the leader for a spot near the fire? Or would you put on the mask and stay quiet to survive? Just think about that as we look at how this ancient trap still works today. But here is the terrifying realization that changes everything we know about human history. It wasn't just the cold they were fighting, it was each other. We look back at the mammoth bone houses at sites like Kostenki and Dolny Vestonich, and we marvel at early human ingenuity. We think they built these magnificent, complex structures of interlocking bones solely to keep the deadly Ice Age out. But that is only half the truth. The tribal leaders, the shamans, the alpha hunters, they didn't just build these domes to block the freezing wind. They built them to lock you in. Imagine the brutal reality of that absolute power dynamic playing out in the suffocating dark. Picture a widow whose husband was killed in a hunt, or an injured gatherer who could no longer contribute heavy, calorie-dense food to the collective. They wouldn't be violently, loudly expelled from the dome. That would waste precious physical energy and invite chaos. Instead, they would experience the terrifying, agonizingly slow process of the silent nudge. Night by night, their sleeping furs would be subtly shifted just one single inch further away from the radiant heat of the central hearth. A simple disagreement with the alpha hunter meant waking up to find thick frost forming on the inside of your animal skins. The invisible temperature gradient within that 15-foot dome was the ultimate unarguable judge, jury, and executioner. The harsh, unforgiving winter was the greatest tool of psychological control ever invented in human history. Nature provided the existential deadly threat, the tribe provided the extortion. The cold was merely the anvil, but the tribe was the hammer striking you down. They systematically convinced you that the only possible safety in the world was inside their specific cage of bones, strictly under their arbitrary rules, and by their heavily guarded fire. And they were absolutely right. But in exchanging your absolute freedom for their life-saving warmth, you fundamentally altered the human psyche forever. You became completely domesticated by the fear of the cold. Would you have traded your absolute freedom for a spot near the fire? Drop a comment below right now and tell me what you would choose. Because even though the physical ice age ended long ago, that exact same transaction is happening to you right now. Fast forward 30,000 years to today. You are not wearing heavy, wet animal skins. You are wearing a tailored business suit, or perhaps a comfortable cotton hoodie. You are sitting safely in an air-conditioned office or working remotely from a temperature-controlled, well-lit apartment. The deadly blizzards outside are effortlessly held back by double-glazed windows, concrete walls, and modern central heating systems. But the psychological software running deep in the background of your brain is exactly the same as the terrified caveman huddled in the Mammoth bone house. The thermal hierarchy hasn't disappeared. It has simply evolved to fit the modern world. Today, the corporation you work for is the Mammoth Bone House. Your monthly salary, your job security, your health insurance, and your social standing are the fire. Think carefully about the invisible lines of power and influence in your workplace. The CEO, the senior executives, the favored inner circle, they sit closest to the metaphorical hearth. They control the budget, the resources, the promotions, and the warmth. And the rest of the employees are meticulously arranged in concentric circles around them, desperately trying not to be pushed to the freezing, terrifying perimeter of layoffs, restructuring, and unemployment. Just like in the Ice Age, the fire wasn't just heat, it was currency, it was power, and that exact same power dynamic dictates how you act every single day at work. When your boss subtly implies that your job might be at risk during a performance review, or when your colleagues conveniently forget to invite you to a crucial strategic meeting, you immediately feel a sharp, undeniable pang of anxiety in your chest. That isn't just modern workplace stress. That is your ancient anterior cingulate cortex firing up with the exact same primal, agonizing terror as the Ice Age human being physically nudged away from the life-saving flames. Your primitive brain still fundamentally believes that social exclusion equals physical death. Have you ever enthusiastically nodded along to a boss's terrible, unfunny joke? Have you ever stayed completely silent in a meeting when you knew for a fact the entire group was making a disastrous financial decision? Have you ever faked a smile, swallowed your pride, and fundamentally changed your personality just to perfectly fit in with a toxic corporate culture? Don't judge yourself too harshly for this. You aren't just being overly polite. You aren't just being a strategic team player. You are experiencing the deeply ingrained primal instinct of a human terrified of the cold. Modern society uses the exact same ancient mechanics of ostracism to enforce mass compliance. The constant threat of being canceled on the internet, the paralyzing fear of losing your professional network, the terror of becoming a social outcast in your community, these are our modern blizzards. We still routinely trade our authentic selves, our free will, and our dissenting voices for the perceived safety of the in-group. We still voluntarily allow those who control the fire to manipulate our daily behavior, because our 30,000-year-old biology constantly screams at us that rebellion means freezing to death. We look at our towering glass skyscrapers, our sprawling digital networks, and our perfectly heated smart homes, and we proudly declare that we conquered the Ice Age. We firmly believe we left the mammoth bone houses behind in the primitive dust of history. But we didn't escape them at all. We just made them infinitely bigger and much harder to see. We simply traded literal cages made of mammoth bone for invisible, psychological cages of social and economic compliance. As long as it is cold outside, whether that cold is a literal freezing blizzard or the harsh, unforgiving reality of economic survival in the modern world, there will always be someone cleverly leveraging the fire to control you. The true, ultimate survival test isn't whether you can endure the dropping temperature. It's whether you can clearly recognize exactly who is using the warmth to buy your soul. If you want to understand the invisible psychological forces constantly controlling your mind, make sure to subscribe. We have many more fires to uncover, and the cold is always waiting outside.